My husband David was brushing my hair with harsh strokes, the bristles digging into my scalp as he held up his phone for a video call. To an outside observer, he appeared to be a devoted husband, showing care for his sick wife. He smiled at the camera, his voice in that smooth, deep baritone tone that once made my knees weak. "Mom, don't worry," he said, with a dark laugh. "I'm telling you, this cripple doesn't hear a thing. It's like talking to a brick wall." The lawyer said, "If I get her to sign the power of attorney papers this Friday, we're done. The moment the ink dries, I'm dumping her in that state facility by the highway. You know, the cheap one that smells terrible. Then this house, the cars, the money, all ours." I sat frozen in my wheelchair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding against my chest like a trapped bird in a cage. But I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I stared blankly at the wall, just as I had done for the past 4 weeks. Because what Marcus didn't know was this: 10 minutes ago, there had been a loud pop in my left ear, followed by the hum of the air conditioner and the chirping of the cardinal outside the window. My hearing had returned, and the first thing I heard was my husband's plan to destroy me. Before I tell you how I used my silence to tear his entire life apart, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you've ever had to smile at a snake while waiting for the right moment. My name is Maya. I'm 32 years old and a senior commercial attorney in Seattle. Or I was, until a rare viral infection attacked my auditory nerves a month ago, leaving me in a completely silent world and fighting severe vertigo. For 4 weeks, I lived in a terrifying, silent void. My balance was so disrupted I couldn't walk without falling, which condemned me to this wheelchair. I was defenseless. I was scared. And I thought I was lucky to have David, my husband of 3 years, the man whose 3 failed business ventures I had financed, including his currently money-losing gym. I thought he was my rock. I viewed his taking over my emails and managing the house as acts of love, but when his voice crystallized in my ears, sharp and ruthless in its clarity, I realized I wasn't his wife. I was his paycheck. And now that the paycheck had stopped working, he was ready to cash me out. David continued brushing my hair, pulling a tangle so hard my head snapped back. I let my head loll to the side, maintaining the role of helpless, disconnected patient. On his phone screen, I could see its reflection in the vanity mirror was my mother-in-law Loretta. She was sitting in her kitchen, wearing one of those big church hats she loved, looking like a pious woman who wouldn't hurt a fly. Her voice came through the speaker, rapid, but undeniably clear. "Don't forget to sell those bags first, Marcus," Loretta said, her voice dripping with greed. "I saw a Birkin in her closet last Thanksgiving. That alone could pay off your credit card debt. And get the jewelry out of the safe before you send her to that facility. If she goes there, the state might try to seize her assets for care. We can't let that happen. This is my money." "Your money?" I thought, anger boiling in my stomach. "I bought every brick in this 5-bedroom mansion in Buckhead. I paid for your Cadillac lease, Loretta. I paid for Marcus's trainers, equipment, even the suit he's wearing right now." I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up, grab the phone, and tell them exactly where they could go. But the lawyer in me, the shark who closed multi-million-dollar deals, took control. If I reacted now, this would just be a family quarrel. My word against his. He could claim I was hallucinating from medication. He could say he was joking. No. I needed more than anger. I needed evidence. I needed to destroy them so comprehensively they could never crawl out from under the rubble. Marcus laughed at his mother's comment. "Don't worry, Mom. I already have a buyer for the Mercedes. I told everyone I'm selling it to pay Maya's medical expenses. People are eating up this tragic husband role. They're even starting a GoFundMe for us. Can you believe it? Idiots." He dropped the brush on the dresser with a clatter. "Listen, I have to go. I need to feed her this slop so she doesn't die before Friday. Her hands need to be steady enough to sign." "Okay, baby," Loretta purred. "You're doing the Lord's work. Just finish it. Call me when you get the papers." The call ended. The room fell into heavy silence with my newly acquired knowledge. Marcus sighed loudly, a sound of pure annoyance, and turned to look at me. The mask of loving husband completely dropped. His face contorted with disgust. "Look at you," he muttered, leaning forward until his face was inches from mine. He thought I was in a silent world, oblivious to his cruelty. "You useless vegetable. You used to be so cocky, walking around like you owned the world just because you passed the bar exam. Look at you now, drooling on yourself. He grabbed a face towel and roughly wiped the bit of saliva at the corner of my mouth, pressing hard enough to bruise. I kept my eyes unfocused, looking through him, regulating my breathing to stay calm. Friday, he whispered, tapping my cheek lightly with his index finger. Friday, you sign everything over to me, and then you're gone. I'm turning this room into a game room. Maybe I'll put a pool table right where you're sitting. He stood up and walked toward the door. I'll bring dinner. Try not to fall out of the chair. The door clicked shut. I waited 5 seconds, then 10. Then I let out my breath like a sob stuck in my throat. The silence of the room filled with the sound of my own irregular breathing. I could hear it. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could hear the distant traffic noise. But the most important thing I heard was the deadline. Friday. Today was Tuesday. I had 3 days. 3 days to act helpless. 3 days to gather evidence. 3 days to turn the tables on the man I had sworn to love forever. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared fragile, her hair disheveled, her complexion pale, but her eyes were different. The fear was gone. In its place was something cold, sharp, and dangerous. Marcus thought he was living with a victim. He didn't realize he was locked in a cage with a predator that had just woken up. I reached under the wheelchair cushion for my secondary smartphone, the phone I use for high-security client communications. Marcus had taken my personal phone weeks ago, claiming it was too stressful for me, but he didn't know about this one. I turned it on, the screen illuminating my face. My fingers flew across the keyboard, texting the only person I knew I could trust. The only person who had seen through Marcus's charm from the beginning, but whom I had refused to listen to. My sister-in-law Sarah. She was white, married to Marcus's younger brother, and the black sheep of the family for refusing to bow to Loretta's matriarchal bullying. Loretta hated her. Marcus mocked her. But Sarah had always looked at me with eyes full of unspoken warnings. I typed 3 words, I can hear. Then I deleted them. Too risky. If Marcus saw a notification, everything would be over. I needed a better plan. I needed to catch them in the act. I went to the voice recorder app on my phone. I checked the battery. 80%. I slid the phone under the vanity, positioning it behind a heavy perfume bottle so the microphone could capture the room, but the device would remain hidden. Just as I settled back into my chair, the doorknob turned. I quickly relaxed, my eyes taking on a glazed expression. Marcus entered, carrying a bowl of oatmeal that looked like gray paste. Open up, he said, his voice loud and exaggerated, as if speaking to a small child. Time to eat, Maya. Yummy, yummy. He shoved the spoon into my mouth while it was still too hot, not caring about the pain. I had to swallow the burning lump, trying not to grimace. Good girl, he mocked. Eat up. You need the strength to sign my checks. As he fed me, I listened to him hum a melody. It was a happy, cheerful song. He was happy. He was genuinely happy about being on the verge of destroying me. I swallowed another spoonful of the tasteless mixture, feeding my body for the coming battle. Sing your song joyfully, David, I thought. Sing it while you still can, because when I'm done with you, you won't even have a voice left to scream. Trust is a currency you should never buy from those who cannot be honest. The lesson I learned in that bedroom cost me my marriage, my health, and nearly my sanity. But it bought me a freedom I never knew existed. Don't let loyalty turn you into a victim. If you're watching this, take a hard look at the people brushing your hair. Are they grooming you or preparing you for slaughter? Subscribe now to see how I made David regret the day he met me with every fiber of his being. The door opened again, and the smell hit me before the man reached the bed. It was the scent of old grease and congealed fat. David placed a tray on my lap with a carelessness that splashed water on the comforter. On the plate was a piece of meatloaf clearly taken straight from the refrigerator, with stiff, cold mashed potatoes beside it. It was leftovers from 3 nights ago. He hadn't even bothered to heat it in the microwave. Eat up, he said, his voice dripping with fake cheer, as he sat on the edge of the bed. He watched me for a moment, making me take a bite of the cold, grainy potato. I forced my throat to work, swallowing the bile that rose against the food. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a document. He spread it on the bed table, pushing the water glass aside. Look here, baby, he said, leaning closer. His breath smelled of mint, probably to cover the scent of the expensive whiskey he'd been drinking downstairs. He raised his hands, his fingers shaky, drawing meaningless patterns. He was mimicking sign language, or at least what he thought sign language looked like. He pointed at the paper, then at himself, then made a cross shape with his fingers. Doctor, he enunciated, exaggerating the syllables. Insurance. Help you? I looked at his hands, then at the document. He thought I was brain damaged. He thought the virus that took my hearing had also taken my intelligence. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I'm not just a lawyer. I'm a shark in the commercial sector. I've drafted contracts that merge international corporations. I've found loopholes in deals that earned my clients millions. And there, at the top of the page, in bold black letters, it didn't say medical insurance authorization. It said durable power of attorney. My eyes quickly scanned the text out of habit, keeping my face blank and pitiful. It was a standard template, probably downloaded from a free legal site, but it was lethally effective. It gave David Anthony Brooks full, unlimited authority over my assets, bank accounts, real estate, and medical decisions. Article 4 immediately caught my eye. The right to liquidate assets to finance necessary care. This was the key. He wouldn't just take control. He would sell my house, my car, my investments, and funnel the money into his own pockets under the guise of my care. Then, according to Article 7, he had the authority to determine residence. This was the ticket to the state facility he had mentioned on the phone. He tapped aggressively on the signature line. Sign, he said, making a scribbling motion with his hand. Dr. Cumming. Paper needed. The audacity was breathtaking. He was using crude pantomime to get me to sign my own death warrant. Rage flared in my chest, threatening to break my composure. I wanted to grab the pen and stab it into the paper. I wanted to shout that I could read far better than him. But I remembered the voice recorder hidden under the vanity. I remembered the message I had almost sent to Sarah. I needed more. An unsigned document wasn't enough. I needed more incrimination. I needed to see how far he would go. Slowly, trembling, I raised my hand. I let my fingers shake, mimicking the severe vertigo that had plagued me for weeks. David pushed the pen into my hand to make me hold it. That's it, he encouraged. Right there. I touched the pen to the paper. I watched the ink make a small black dot on the signature line. Then I let my hand cramp up. The pen fell from my hand and rolled off the bed table, landing on the floor with a soft sound. I let my head fall back against the pillows, closing my eyes as if the effort had exhausted me. There was a second of silence. Then sharp, stinging pain appeared on my cheek. He had slapped me. It wasn't a hard punch, but it was a disrespectful, stinging slap. Open-palmed and humiliating. It was the kind of physical correction you might give a disobedient dog. My eyes opened. David was leaning over me, his face inches from mine, his eyes dark with sinister disappointment. Don't you dare play games with me, he hissed, abandoning the fake sign language entirely. I know you're in there somewhere. Stop wasting my time. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him, his grip painful, his fingers pressing into my jaw. You're going to sign this document, Maya, one way or another. I'm tired of waiting for you. He suddenly stood up, snatching the unsigned document from the tray. He looked at me with complete disgust, straightening his suit jacket as if touching me had contaminated him. Fine, he spat. If you can't hold a pen today, we'll try again tomorrow. But I'm not doing this alone. I'm bringing reinforcements. He walked toward the door, stopping with his hand on the frame. He looked back, a cruel grin twisting his lips. Mom's coming tomorrow morning. She knows exactly how to deal with stubborn mules like you. She'll help you hold the pen. She'll help you with a lot of things. He turned off the light, leaving me in the encroaching darkness with the cold dinner tray on my lap. The door clicked shut, and I heard the lock turn from outside. He was locking me in. I sat in the darkness, my cheeks still aching from his touch. My hand went to where he had struck me. That slap was a mistake, David. That slap crossed a line from fraud to abuse. And tomorrow, when you bring your mother to this house to assault me, you won't be bringing reinforcements. You'll be bringing another defendant. I reached for the cold meatloaf, took a bite, and swallowed. I needed the calories. I needed the strength, because tomorrow the real performance would begin. Morning didn't arrive with the gentle warmth of sunlight, but with the aggressive screech of suitcase wheels rolling across my hardwood floors downstairs. It was barely 8 a.m., and the invasion had officially begun. I heard the heavy thud of luggage being hauled up the stairs, followed by a voice that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. It was Loretta. She wasn't here to visit a sick daughter-in-law. She was here to measure the drapes and claim her territory. The bedroom door swung open and she marched in, wearing a floral dress that looked like upholstery and a hat wide enough to block out the sun. Behind her, David dragged two massive suitcases, sweating from the exertion. He didn't look at me. He just dropped the bags with a heavy thud right in the middle of the room. Put these in the guest room. David, he muttered, wiping his forehead. No, baby, leave them here, Loretta commanded, her voice booming in the silence. She pointed a manicured finger at the corner of the room. I need to be close to her if I'm going to help you get this done. Besides, once she's gone, this will be the master suite, and I'll need the space. She walked past my wheelchair without even a glance. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't check my vitals. She walked straight to the double doors of my walk-in closet. This was my sanctuary, a space I had designed with custom shelving and lighting to house the wardrobe I had built over a decade of hard work and corporate law. I heard the distinct sound of hangers sliding along the metal rods and the rustle of silk. I sat frozen, my hands resting limp in my lap, forcing my eyes to remain dull and lifeless while my ears picked up every sound of her violation. She emerged a moment later holding my black quilted Chanel flap bag, the one I had purchased to celebrate making senior partner. She draped it over her shoulder, turning side to side in front of the full-length mirror, admiring herself with a greedy smirk. This is nice quality, she said, rubbing her rough thumb over the delicate lambskin leather. You know, David, when we finally ship her off to that facility, I'm going to turn that closet into my prayer room. I need a holy, sanctified space to pray for your success and for our family. Hearing her talk about holiness while plotting to steal my life made bile rise in my throat. But she wasn't done. She gestured back toward the rows of designer bags and shoes. But we can't keep all this clutter, she said, her tone shifting from pious to practical. These bags represent a lot of money, son. There's a consignment shop over in Capitol Hill that pays cash for high-end goods. This one bag alone could probably cover 2 months of interest on that business loan you took out. David leaned against the doorframe, his eyes lighting up at the prospect. Yeah, Mom. And she's got a couple of Birkins in the back. Those are worth even more. We could probably get 20 or 30 grand if we move them fast. Good, Loretta said, tossing the Chanel bag onto the bed right next to my leg, as if I were nothing more than a piece of furniture. That's a good start. We need to clear all your debts before the baby gets here. We want a fresh start for my grandbaby. My heart hammered against my ribs. The baby. She was talking about the secret child David had with his mistress. The child my money was apparently going to support while I rotted in a state facility. Loretta walked over to the window, peeling back the curtain to look down at the driveway. And that car, David, she said, her voice taking on a sharp, critical edge. That big black truck of hers sitting in the driveway. The Mercedes G-Wagon. My dream car. The symbol of my independence. The vehicle I had bought with my own bonus check while David was still driving a leased sedan. It's just sitting there gathering dust, she said, shaking her head with feigned pity. You need to sell that too, baby. Sell it today. Why would she need a car like that now? Look at her. She's a vegetable. She can't even walk to the bathroom, let alone drive a luxury tank like that. Cripples don't need G-Wagons, David. They need vans with ramps. Sell it and put the money in the joint account immediately. David pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. You're right, Mom. I'll call the dealer. My friend works there. He can probably give me a cash offer by this afternoon. Good boy, Loretta cooed, turning back to face me with a predatory smile stretching across her face. She leaned down, her perfume clouding the air around me. Well, hello, Maya, she said loudly, enunciating every syllable as if I were stupid instead of deaf. I'm here to take care of you. Now we're going to have a lovely day, just you and me, under the heavy duvet cover, my right hand curled into a fist so tight my fingernails dug into my palm, cutting the skin. I felt the sting of it, grounding me, keeping me from lunging at her throat. They were stripping me for parts, selling off my life piece by piece to fund their future, but they had made one fatal miscalculation. They thought the woman in the wheelchair was helpless. They didn't know. She was counting every second and recording every word. The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary chicken wafted through the house, but it didn't make my stomach growl. Instead, it made it turn, because this wasn't a dinner for me. This was a celebration of my demise. David had invited his brother, Andre, and his wife Sarah over for what he called a prayer circle for Maya. But as I sat parked in the corner of the dining room, like an unwanted piece of furniture, I realized it was nothing more than a vulture's feast. They sat at my mahogany table, the one I had commissioned from a craftsman in Portland, passing platters of food and pouring my vintage wine while I sat 10 feet away with nothing but a glass of lukewarm water on a side table. No one offered me a plate. No one even looked in my direction except to gesture at me with a chicken wing while they spoke about me in the third person as if I were already dead. It was a masterclass in dehumanization. Loretta sat at the head of the table, my seat, her large hat casting a shadow over the spread. To family, she toasted, raising a crystal goblet filled with my expensive Cabernet, and to God's mysterious ways. Marcus clinked his glass against hers, grinning like a man who had just won the lottery. God is good, Mama. Getting that signature on Friday is going to be the miracle we've been praying for. Andre laughed, a deep, booming sound that used to make me smile, but now just sounded complicit. So what's the plan, bro? You really going to put her in Shady Pines or whatever that place is called? David shrugged, spearing a potato. Hell if I know. Somewhere cheap. Somewhere out of the way. I can't have her drooling around here while I'm trying to build my empire. Loretta nodded vigorously, tearing into a piece of bread. It's for the best, son. She was never right for you anyway. Look at her. She's barren, dry as a desert. All that money, and she couldn't even give you a son to carry on the name. The insult landed with the precision of a sniper shot. For years we had tried. For years I had endured hormone injections and invasive procedures, blaming myself for our infertility, only to find out later that David had been taking testosterone supplements for his gym gains that killed his sperm count. But here they were, rewriting history, making me the defective one. She was too busy with that lawyer job, David sneered, wiping grease from his chin. Stress dried her up. She thought she was a man, trying to run with the big dogs. Well, look at her now. Useless. Completely useless. Just a husk taking up space. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the intricate pattern of the wallpaper, trying to keep my breathing even. Trying not to scream that I was the one who paid for his mother's hip surgery, that I was the one who bailed Andre out of jail last year. I was the only thing standing between this family and the poverty they seemed so desperate to escape. The front door opened with a sudden draft of cool air, and Sarah rushed in. She was breathless, her cheeks flushed pink, looking flustered and apologetic. Sorry I'm late, she said, shaking off her coat. The traffic on I-5 was a nightmare. She stopped mid-stride, her eyes landing on me sitting alone in the shadows, away from the warmth of the table. The smile slid off her face like oil. Why is she over there? Sarah asked, her voice sharp with confusion. Why isn't she eating with us? David waved a hand dismissively. She's fine, Sarah. She's not lucid right now. She just makes a mess if we try to feed her at the table. Sit down. Grab a plate. Sarah didn't sit down. She walked straight over to me, crouching down so her face was level with mine. She looked into my eyes, searching for something, for a spark of the sister-in-law she used to laugh with over wine. She looks dehydrated, Sarah said, touching my hand, her skin cool against my feverish palm. Her lips are cracked. David, get her some water. She stood up and grabbed a pitcher from the table, pouring a glass with trembling hands. She brought it to my lips, tilting it gently. Here, Maya, drink, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted to drink. I wanted to gulp it down. But more than that, I wanted to grab her hand and squeeze it. I wanted to signal her. But before the water could touch my lips, Loretta's voice cracked like a whip. Put that down, Sarah. Leave it alone. She doesn't know she's thirsty. You're just going to make her choke and make a mess on my floor. Sarah froze, the glass hovering inches from my mouth. She's a human being, Loretta. She's not a dog. You can't just leave her in the corner. Loretta slammed her fork down on the table. She's a vegetable, Sarah, a broken appliance. Now sit your ass down and eat before I lose my patience. Sarah hesitated, looking from her husband, who was studiously ignoring the conflict, to David, who was glaring at her, and finally back to me. She slowly lowered the glass, setting it on the side table with a soft clink. She turned away, her shoulders slumped in defeat, walking back to the table. But as she turned, I saw it. She raised a hand to her face, and quickly, furiously wiped a tear from her cheek. She sat down, but she didn't eat. She stared at her empty plate, her jaw tight, and in that moment, amidst the clatter of silverware and the cruel laughter of my husband and his mother, I felt a surge of hope. I wasn't alone in this room anymore. Sarah saw. She knew. And that tear was the crack in their armor I had been waiting for. The front door closed with a heavy thud, sealing the house in a silence that felt suffocatingly dense after the raucous noise of the dinner party. Sarah and Andre were gone, leaving only the clinking of crystal and the low murmuring of conspirators. David and Loretta sat amidst the ruins of the feast, their faces flushed with wine and triumph. David leaned back in his chair, his suit jacket discarded over the armrest, his tie loosened. He looked every inch the lord of the manor, relaxed and victorious in a kingdom he had stolen. He poured another glass of the $50 Pinot Noir I had been saving for our anniversary, the dark ruby liquid swirling in the crystal glass. "So it's done," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "Just 3 more days, Mama. 3 more days and we're free." Loretta chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You did good, son," she said, reaching across the table to pat his hand. "You played the part perfectly. That little performance about finding the best care facility for her? Priceless." I almost shed a tear myself. David laughed, taking a long sip of wine. "Yeah, well, I had to make it believable, didn't I? I can't have anyone asking questions when she disappears into the system. But listen, Mama, we need to talk about Tiffany. She's getting impatient. She's been calling me non-stop since yesterday. She wants to know when she can move in." Loretta's expression shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What does she want now?" she asked, suspicion coloring her tone. "She wants to bring the boy," David said, his voice dropping lower, though in the sudden quiet of the house it carried clearly to my corner. "She says the apartment is too small for him. He's 4 now, Mama. He needs space to run around. He needs a backyard. He needs a real home, not that cramped little box I've been paying for." He paused, glancing toward me briefly before continuing. "As if I were nothing more than a potted plant. She wants to bring him here, Mama, into this house." My breath hitched in my chest. A boy, 4 years old. David and I had been married for 3 years, trying for a baby for 2 of them. And all that time, while I was injecting hormones into my stomach and crying over negative pregnancy tests, he had a son. A whole living, breathing child hidden away in an apartment I was paying for. The betrayal was so physical, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But Loretta's response was the final blow. She nodded slowly, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. "You're right, son," she said, taking another sip of wine. "That boy is my grandson, my blood. He deserves better than some rinky-dink apartment. He deserves this." She swept her arm around the room, gesturing at the high ceilings, the crown molding, the expensive art on the walls. "He deserves to grow up in a mansion, not like that barren mule over there." She jerked her head in my direction, her lip curling in disgust. "She's useless, David. Absolutely useless. Can't give you a child. Can't even hear you insult her. Why should she live like a queen while my grandson lives like a pauper?" David nodded eagerly. "Exactly, Mama. That's what I told Tiffany. I said, just give me until Friday. Once Maya signs that power of attorney, she's out, and you and the boy are in. I already picked out his room. You know, the one next to the master suite. The one Maya turned into her office with all those drafting tables and models. I'm going to clear all that junk out, make it a proper room for a little boy. Maybe get him one of those race car beds. He'd love that. My office. The space where I had spent countless nights building my career, drafting contracts that secured our future. He was going to turn it into a bedroom for the child he had with another woman while lying next to me every night. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about the years of deception, the systematic dismantling of my life to fund his secret family. Every dollar I earned, every bonus I brought home, had been siphoned off to support a life I didn't even know existed. I wasn't just a wife to him. I was an ATM, a resource to be exploited until it ran dry. And now that I was broken, he was discarding me to make room for the real family he had been building all along. The room seemed to spin. But I forced myself to focus on the recording device hidden beneath the vanity table, capturing every word, every confession, every nail in their coffin. They thought they were planning their future, but they were dictating their own sentences. I closed my eyes, letting a single tear slide down my cheek. Not for the marriage I had lost, but for the woman I used to be. The woman who had trusted this monster with her heart and her life. That woman died tonight in this dining room. And from her ashes, something cold and hard was beginning to rise. Something that would not stop until every lie was exposed and every debt was paid in full. They wanted a war. They had no idea. They had just declared it on the wrong woman. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed twice, echoing through the silent house like a death knell. I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the conversation about the 4-year-old boy over and over again. Then I heard the faint click of the front door unlocking. My heart stopped. Was it David coming back to finish me off? No, the footsteps were too light, too hesitant. They crept up the stairs, avoiding the squeaky third step that everyone else ignored. The door to my room creaked open a sliver, letting in a slice of hallway light. It was Sarah. She looked terrified, her face pale in the gloom. She tiptoed to the bedside table where she had left her car keys earlier during the chaos of the dinner. She grabbed them, but she didn't leave. Instead, she stood over me, watching my chest rise and fall. I kept my breathing shallow, feigning the deep sleep of the medicated invalid. She let out a shaky breath and sank onto the edge of the mattress. I'm so sorry, Maya, she whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling with tears. I'm a coward. I should have screamed at them downstairs. I should have called the police right then and there. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, a gesture of tenderness that felt shocking after days of abuse. You don't know what they're doing. It's not just the power of attorney. I heard Andre talking to David by the car. They have a notary coming tomorrow, a crooked one. They're going to forge your signature on a quitclaim deed. They're selling the house, Maya. They're selling it to some developer for cash, under the table before you're even in the facility. The rage that had been simmering in my gut turned into cold, hard steel. Selling my house. The house I bought with my partnership bonus. The house where I had envisioned raising children. They were going to liquidate my sanctuary for quick cash to fund their new life with the secret baby. Sarah was sobbing quietly now, her face buried in her hands. I can't stop them, she wept. Andre will kill me if I say anything. They're going to destroy you, and I'm just watching it happen. I couldn't lie there anymore. I couldn't let the only person with a conscience in this entire family walk out that door thinking I was a victim. I needed a soldier. And Sarah just volunteered. I opened my eyes. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. I reached out and clamped my hand around her wrist, my grip strong and steady. Sarah, I said, my voice raspy from disuse, but clear as a bell. Lock the door. Sarah froze, her eyes bulging in disbelief. She looked at me, then at the door, then back at me, as if she were seeing a ghost. Maya, she breathed. You can speak. I can speak, I said, sitting up and pulling the duvet around my shoulders. And more importantly, I can hear. I heard everything, Sarah. The baby, the mistress, the facility, and now the deed. Sarah looked like she might faint. She swayed slightly and gripped the bedpost for support. Oh, my God, she whispered. How long? Long enough, I replied. Now go lock that door before David wakes up and comes in here to check on his investment. Sarah scrambled to the door, turning the lock with a soft click before rushing back to my side. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. You've been playing them, she said. I'm fighting for my life, I corrected her. And now so are you. Because if they get away with this, they won't stop with me. Do you think Andre is any better than his brother? You're just the next piggy bank in line, Sarah. She nodded slowly, the realization sinking in. What do we do? She asked, her voice steadying. Tell me what to do. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. We're going to let them think they've won, I said. We're going to let them dig their own graves 6 feet deep. But I need you to be my hands and eyes out there. I need you to find out who this notary is. I need you to get the name of the developer. And I need you to act like the scared, silent sister-in-law they think you are. I can do that, Sarah said, wiping her face. I can do that. Good, I said, lying back down and pulling the covers up. Because the show isn't over yet. Tomorrow I'm going to sign their papers. But they're not going to be the papers they think they are. Sarah squeezed my hand one last time, a pact sealed in the shadows of my stolen bedroom. Then she unlocked the door and slipped out into the night, leaving me alone in the dark. But the darkness didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like cover. They thought I was the prey. They had no idea the hunter was already inside the house. The next morning, I implemented phase 1 of my counterattack. While David was in the shower singing loudly about a new beginning, I retrieved my hidden phone and sent a coded text to Dr. Chen, my neurologist and also my former college roommate. The message was simple: execute Protocol Omega. Chen knew exactly what that meant. We had discussed hypothetical worst-case scenarios years ago over wine, never imagining one would actually come to pass. 2 hours later, Chen arrived at the house wearing his white coat and carrying a medical bag that looked ominously heavy. David greeted him at the door with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Oh, doctor, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, wringing his hands. "I'm just so worried about her. She seems to be getting worse." Chen nodded gravely, maintaining a perfect professional mask. "Let's take a look," he said, leading the way upstairs. I sat in my wheelchair, staring blankly at the wall as they entered. Chen went through the motions of a thorough examination, checking my ears with an otoscope, testing my reflexes, shining a light in my eyes. He leaned in close, pretending to inspect my pupils, and whispered, barely audible, "I got you, Maya. Stay strong." Then he stepped back, shaking his head with a heavy sigh. "I'm afraid the news isn't good, Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice somber. "The viral infection has caused irreversible damage to the auditory nerve. Her hearing is gone permanently." David let out a strangled sob, covering his face with his hands. "Oh no," he wailed. "My poor wife. My poor Maya." Chen continued, twisting the knife. "It's worse than that. The infection has spread to the temporal lobe. We're seeing signs of rapid cognitive decline. She's losing her ability to process reality. Within a week, maybe 2, she'll be completely vegetative. She won't know who she is, let alone who you are." David's shoulders shook with what looked like grief, but I knew was suppressed laughter. He looked up, his eyes dry, but his expression tragic. "So there's no hope?" he asked. "No chance she'll ever recover?" "None," Chen said firmly. "She's a shell, Mr. Brooks. The woman you knew is gone. You need to start making arrangements for long-term care." "I'm so sorry." He packed up his bag and shook David's hand, leaving the room with a final pitying glance at me. The moment the front door closed, David dropped the act instantly. He spun around, a wide grin splitting his face. He did a little victory dance right there in the bedroom, pumping his fist in the air. "Yes," he hissed. "Yes. Did you hear that, Mama?" He shouted toward the hallway where Loretta had been lurking. She came bustling in, her face alight with glee. "Permanent," she cackled. "Permanent and vegetative. Oh Lord, is good. He fixed it. Jesus fixed it." David grabbed her hands and they did a little jig together right in front of my wheelchair, high-fiving like they had just won the Super Bowl. "Did you hear that part about cognitive decline?" David crowed. "She won't know anything. She won't know we sold the house. She won't know about Tiffany. She won't know a damn thing. We're in the clear, Mama. Total legal immunity." Loretta clapped her hands together, her eyes shining with avarice. "We need to move fast, baby. Get her out of here before she starts drooling on the furniture." "But wait," Marcus said, his eyes narrowing with a new idea. "If everyone thinks she's this tragic case, why stop at the house? We can milk this, Mama. We can really milk this. People love a tragedy. People love to give money to a grieving husband trying to save his dying wife." Loretta's eyes widened. "Oh, I see where you're going with this. A fundraiser." David nodded, tapping his temple. "A gala. A big tearjerker of a gala right at the church. We invite all her rich lawyer friends, all her clients. We tell them we need money for experimental treatments, for special care. We cry, we pray, and they open their checkbooks. We could clear another 50, maybe 100 grand easy. One last big score before we dump her." Loretta beamed, hugging him tight. "That's my boy. Always thinking. You're a genius, David. A genius. Let's do it. Let's bleed them dry, and then we'll be set for life." I sat there, watching them plan their final heist on my life, feeling a cold calm settle over me. They thought I was a vegetable. They thought I was gone. But they had just given me the perfect stage: a public gala, a room full of witnesses, and a microphone. "Enjoy your victory lap, David," I thought. Because the finish line is a cliff, and you're running full speed toward the edge. The front door opened with a casual familiarity that made my skin crawl, and David walked in not alone, but leading a parade of my replacements. First came a woman, young and sharp-featured, with eyes that scanned the foyer like she was calculating the square footage. This was Tiffany, the mistress I had paid for. Following her was a small boy, who burst into the room with the destructive energy of a tornado. David ushered them inside with a sweep of his arm. "Welcome home, he announced, his voice booming with pride. This is it, baby. All of it is ours now. Loretta was already there, sitting in my favorite armchair, sipping tea like the Queen Mother, surveying her new domain. She clapped her hands when she saw the boy. Come here, Grandma's little man, she cooed, ignoring me completely as I sat motionless in my wheelchair by the window. Positioned like a piece of unwanted furniture, the boy didn't go to her. Instead, he ran straight for the glass double doors of my home office. Inside, on a large drafting table, sat a complex architectural model I had built for a zoning case involving a high-rise development. It was months of work, delicate balsa wood and glass, meticulously assembled. The boy grabbed the edge of the table and shook it, violent delight on his face. Look, Daddy, he screamed. Crash. David laughed, leaning against the doorframe. Let him play, he said, waving a dismissive hand. It's all trash anyway. Tear it down, son. Make room for your toys. I watched in silent agony as the boy swept his arm across the table, sending the model crashing to the floor. The sound of splintering wood and shattering miniature glass filled the room, followed by the boy's triumphant laughter. He stomped on the delicate structures, crushing months of my professional life beneath his light-up sneakers. Good job. David cheered, clapping his hands. That's my boy. Clear it all out. Daddy's going to get you that race car bed tomorrow. While the boy destroyed my work, Tiffany wandered toward the stairs, running her hand along the banister. I'm going to get comfortable, she announced. Throwing a smirk in my direction, she disappeared upstairs into my sanctuary, my bedroom, the room where I had slept, where I had cried, where I had planned a future that was now dust. 10 minutes later, she descended, and the sight nearly made me break character. She was wearing my robe. It was a custom-made golden silk kimono, hand-embroidered in Japan, a gift I had bought for myself after winning my first major case. It draped over her body, shimmering in the afternoon light, like a second skin that she had stolen. She walked with a sway, turning a pirouette in the living room. Feels expensive, she purred, rubbing the silk against her cheek. Feels like money. Loretta nodded approvingly. It suits you much better than it ever suited her, she said, gesturing at me with her teacup. She never had the figure for it. Too stiff, too cold. You fill it out nicely, honey. Tiffany walked over to where I sat, her eyes locking onto mine with a mixture of pity and malice. She smelled of my perfume, another theft. She leaned down, bringing her face close to mine, invading my personal space until I could feel the heat of her breath. She reached out and stroked my cheek, her fingers cool and presumptuous. Thank you for the beautiful house, she whispered, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. It's just gorgeous, really, top of the line. Shame you're too broken to enjoy it anymore. But don't worry, I'll take good care of it. And your husband. And your money. She straightened up, laughing lightly, a sound that grated against my returned hearing like broken glass. Loretta cackled from her chair, joining in the mockery. That's right. Tell her, Tiffany. She might be a vegetable, but maybe some part of her brain knows she lost. David walked over and wrapped his arms around Tiffany from behind, nuzzling her neck right there in front of me. Don't waste your breath on her, babe, he mumbled, kissing her shoulder. She's gone. Lights are on. But nobody's home. Just think about tomorrow after the gala, after we cash those checks. We're shipping her off, and this whole place is finally ours. I sat there, stone still, while every instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up, to ball my hand into a fist and drive it into Tiffany's smug face, to tear my robe off her body and throw them all out into the street. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, expanding pressure in my chest that threatened to explode. I focused on my breathing in and out, slow and steady. I focused on the feeling of my nails digging into the palms of my hands, hidden beneath the blanket. I anchored myself to the floor with sheer willpower, thinking about the camera hidden in the bookshelf, recording every second of this violation, thinking about the audio file that was currently saving to the cloud, capturing their confessions. Let them laugh. Let them destroy. Let them steal. Because tomorrow at the gala, I was going to take back everything, starting with my voice and ending with their freedom. The sound of a power drill tearing through metal shrieked through the house, vibrating in my teeth and echoing in the hollow chambers of my chest. David hadn't even waited for the sun to set before calling a locksmith, a man who looked like he operated out of the trunk of his car and asked no questions as long as the cash was up front. They were in my home office now, the room Tiffany's son had just trashed. and they were violating the last secure space I had left my private floor safe. Hidden beneath a rug behind the desk, I sat in the hallway, my wheelchair positioned so I had a direct line of sight. David had wheeled me there, claiming he wanted me to watch my empire crumble. But really, it was just another act of petty cruelty. He wanted me to see him take what was mine. Knowing I was powerless to stop him, Loretta stood over the locksmith, tapping her foot impatiently. "Hurry it up," she snapped. "We have things to do. Popping this thing shouldn't take all day." The locksmith grunted, sweat dripping from his nose as the drill bit finally bit through the locking mechanism with a loud metallic crack. The heavy door swung open, revealing the steel interior. David pushed the man aside, almost knocking him over in his haste to get to the contents. He reached in, his hands trembling with greed, and pulled out the stack of manila envelopes. "Look at this, Mama," he crowed, waving the papers in the air. "Deeds, titles, the lake house, the rental properties. It's all here. We own it all now." He tossed the legal documents onto the floor like trash, letting them scatter across the hardwood. Then he went back for the real prize, the velvet boxes and leather cases. He pulled out my watch collection first, the vintage Rolex Daytona I had bought after my first big merger. The Patek Philippe my father had left me. He slid the Rolex onto his own wrist, holding it up to the light. "Fits me better anyway," he laughed, turning it this way and that. She never appreciated fine engineering. He began tossing jewelry to Loretta: diamond tennis bracelets, sapphire earrings, heavy gold chains. She caught them with surprising agility for a woman of her size, draping them over her arms like tinsel on a Christmas tree. "Oh Lord, look at this sparkle," she cooed, holding a diamond pendant up to her neck. "This is real quality, son. We're going to look like royalty at the gala tomorrow." But the worst was yet to come. David reached into the very back of the safe and pulled out a long flat box covered in black velvet. My breath hitched in my throat. That box held the Emerald Sweden necklace and earring set of Colombian emeralds and diamonds that I had purchased to mark my 5-year anniversary of being cancer-free. It was my talisman, my symbol of survival and life. David popped the lid open and the green stones flashed in the dim light. Tiffany gasped, stepping forward, her eyes wide and hungry. "Oh, Daddy," she breathed, reaching out with greedy fingers. "I want that one." David took the necklace out, the heavy gems clicking softly against each other. "Come here, babe," he said, turning her around. He fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin right in front of me. "There," he said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "Green for money. It brings out your eyes. Way better than it ever looked on her pale neck." Tiffany ran to the mirror, posing and preening, turning her head to make the diamonds catch the light. "I feel like a movie star," she squealed, spinning around to kiss David hard on the mouth. "Thank you, baby. Thank you." I watched this desecration, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I didn't move a muscle. I didn't blink. I let my gaze remain unfocused and dull, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that on the top shelf of the bookcase behind them, nestled between two heavy law textbooks, was a tiny black lens. Sarah had placed it there an hour ago while pretending to look for a book to read to me. The red recording light was taped over, but the sensor was active, capturing every theft, every kiss, every word of their conspiracy. David turned back to the empty safe, kicking the door shut with his boot. "That's it," he said, dusting his hands off. "We cleaned her out. Between the jewelry, the watches, and the cash in here, we're sitting on at least 200 grand easy. But that's just the appetizer." He walked over to Loretta, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Tomorrow is the main course, Mama, the Hope for Maya Gala at the church. I checked the RSVP list, and we've got every big shot lawyer and doctor in Seattle coming. They're going to see poor, tragic David weeping over his invalid wife, and they're going to open their wallets wide. If we play our cards right, if I can squeeze out just a few more tears during my speech, we could clear another 500,000. Easy. That's $500,000 tax-free cash donations for the trust fund." He laughed, a sound that was devoid of any humanity. "And once that money is in my hand, we're gone. We put Maya in the van, drive her down to that state asylum in Monroe, drop her off at the front door with her paperwork, and vanish. By the time anyone realizes she's not getting better, we'll be on a beach in Mexico with new names and a cool $1 million in the bank." Loretta beamed, patting his cheek. "That's my brilliant boy," she said, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. "Enjoy your last night in a soft bed, Maya. Tomorrow you belong to the state." and we belong to the world. They walked out of the room laughing, leaving me alone in the hallway, surrounded by the scattered deeds to my own properties. But as their laughter faded down the stairs, a cold smile touched my lips. Run while you can, David, I thought. Because tomorrow you're not going to Mexico. You're going to prison. The church hall was transformed into a spectacle of pious charity, a stage set for the grandest con of David's life. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in white linen, and the scent of expensive lilies, the funeral flower, hung heavy in the air. David had pulled out all the stops. He stood at the entrance, resplendent in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his face a mask of noble suffering. He greeted each guest with a firm handshake and a tremulous smile, accepting their condolences as if I were already dead. And the guests. Oh, the guests. The room was filled with the cream of Seattle's legal and business society, my colleagues, my clients, people who respected me, people who had no idea they were walking into a trap. I sat on the stage, elevated above the crowd like a sacrificial offering. David had dressed me in a pale, shapeless gown that washed me out completely. He had forbidden makeup, ensuring my face looked gaunt and sickly under the harsh stage lights. My hair was pulled back severely, exposing the hollows of my cheeks. To everyone looking up at me, I was a tragic figure, a brilliant mind reduced to a silent, staring husk. They looked at me with pity, shaking their heads and whispering behind their hands. So sad. I could read on their lips. Such a waste. Loretta was already at the podium, working the crowd into a frenzy of sympathy. She wore a black dress and a hat so large it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. My son, she wailed into the microphone. My poor, devoted son. He has given everything for his wife. He has sold his own possessions, worked night and day just to keep her comfortable. But the medical bills, oh Lord, the bills are crushing us. We're just a humble family trying to do right by this poor afflicted woman. From my vantage point, I saw Sarah sitting in the third row next to Andre. She looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Andre was looking at his phone, bored. Sarah caught my eye for a fleeting second, and I saw the fear there, but also the resolve. She gave a microscopic nod. She was ready. David moved to the center of the stage, taking the microphone from his mother. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the grieving husband. He looked up at me, his expression full of tender sorrow, and for a moment I almost admired his acting skills. If he had put this much effort into his businesses, maybe he wouldn't be a failure. Thank you all for coming, David said, his voice thick with emotion. It means the world to me, to us. Maya. He paused, looking back at me. Maya was the light of my life, and now that light is fading. The doctors say she may never hear my voice again. They say she's slipping away from us. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Someone blew their nose loudly. But I refuse to give up hope, David continued, his voice rising with passion. I believe in miracles, and I believe that with your help, we can get her the care she needs. There are experimental treatments, specialists in Europe, but they're expensive beyond anything a simple gym owner like me can afford. He gestured to the large screen behind him where a slide appeared displaying a QR code and bank account details. The account name was the Maya Brooks Trust, but I knew better. That account was solely in his name, opened 3 days ago at a bank across town. I'm asking you tonight, David said, spreading his arms wide, not for charity, but for love. Help me save my wife. Help me bring her back. Every dollar you give tonight goes directly to her care. Please, open your hearts. Open your wallets. Let's give Maya the chance she deserves. He looked at me again, and this time, behind the mask of grief, I saw the glint of triumph. He thought he had won. He thought the checkbooks were opening, the money was flowing, and his escape route was paved with gold. He walked over to my wheelchair, knelt down, and took my limp hand in his. I love you, baby, he whispered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, but low enough to sound intimate. I'm doing this for you. I looked down at him, at the man who had slept in my bed, who had promised to cherish me, and who was now using my tragedy to fund his betrayal. The rage that had been a cold knot in my stomach for days suddenly ignited into an inferno. The time for silence was over. David stood up, turning back to the crowd, ready to collect his spoils. He raised the microphone to his lips again. Please, he said, give generously for Maya. That was the cue. I took a breath, filling my lungs with the air of the room, the scent of lilies and perfume and lies. And then I moved. My hand, which had been resting passively in my lap, shot out. I grabbed the microphone from his hand with a grip of steel. David froze, his eyes widening in genuine shock. The crowd gasped.
Subscribe.
I stood up. I pushed the wheelchair back, letting it roll away until it hit the back curtain. I stood tall, my spine straight, my chin high. I looked out at the sea of faces at the people who had come to mourn me, and I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just cornered its prey. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice clear, strong, and projecting to the back of the room without a tremor. That was a beautiful performance. But before anyone writes a check, I think there are a few things we need to clarify. David stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. Loretta dropped her handkerchief. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled, and I was about to fill it with the truth. I snapped my fingers, a sharp command. Sarah, sitting in the front row with her laptop, hit a single key. The massive projection screen behind me flickered. The heartwarming montage of our wedding photos vanished, replaced by a grainy, high-definition video time-stamped yesterday afternoon. The image was crisp, showing the interior of my home office. The crowd watched in stunned silence as David appeared on screen, holding a power drill, attacking the floor safe. They watched the sparks fly. They watched the door swing open. They saw him pulling out stacks of cash, deeds, and velvet boxes, but it was the audio that turned the silence into horror. The church sound system, designed to carry the word of God, now carried the confession of a devil. "That cripple," David's voice boomed out, distorted but unmistakable. "She doesn't know anything. Just sign the papers and dump her in the asylum. Get the cheapest one you can find. I don't care if it smells like piss, as long as it's cheap." Loretta's voice joined in, shrill and cruel. "Make sure you get the jewelry first, son. And the car. She doesn't need a G-Wagon. This money isn't for her care, it's for the boy. My grandson deserves a mansion, not that barren mule." The video cut to a new clip, Tiffany walking around my living room wearing my silk robe, stroking my face while I sat motionless in the wheelchair. "Thank you for the beautiful house," she purred, her voice slithering through the sanctuary. "Shame you're too broken to enjoy it." The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A roar of outrage erupted from the pews. People stood up, chairs scraping against the floor. Shouts of "monster" and "thief" rang out. Loretta shrank into her seat, pulling her hat down as if to shield herself from the hatred radiating toward her. But David didn't shrink. He snapped. The realization that his life was over, that his freedom was gone, shattered his paralysis. His face twisted into a mask of pure, primal rage, a cornered animal realizing it has no escape. "You bitch," he screamed, the sound raw and terrifying. He lunged at me, his hands hooked into claws, reaching for my throat, intending to silence me forever. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood my ground, watching him come. But he never reached me. 3 men from the front row, senior partners at my law firm, men who played linebacker in college, vaulted onto the stage with surprising speed. They tackled him mid-stride, slamming him into the floor with a bone-jarring thud. They pinned him down, his face pressed against the wood, his expensive suit tearing as he struggled and cursed, screaming obscenities that echoed in the holy space. I looked down at him, struggling like a worm under a boot. Then I lifted my eyes to the front row, the spotlight following my gaze. It landed on Tiffany, who was frozen in her seat, clutching her purse, looking for an exit that didn't exist. The aisle was blocked by angry donors, by my friends, by people who now saw her for exactly what she was. I raised the microphone one last time, my finger pointing at her like a loaded gun. "And you," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, silencing the room once more. "Take off my mother's jewelry right now. It doesn't suit someone like you." The double doors at the back of the sanctuary flew open with a force that rattled the stained glass windows, and 6 uniformed officers marched in, led by Detective Rivera, a woman I knew from my days working with the DA's office. Rivera didn't look at the stunned congregation. She walked straight down the center aisle, her eyes locked on the stage where my husband was currently being held down by my colleagues. "Get off him," Rivera barked, her voice cutting through the din. The partners released David, who scrambled to his knees, gasping for air, his suit jacket torn, his hair wild, looking like a man who had just survived a car crash only to find himself in a burning building. "David Anthony Brooks, you are under arrest for grand larceny." forgery in the first degree, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Louder than the gasp of the crowd, louder than the pounding of my own heart. David struggled, his face twisting in confusion as the cold steel bit into his wrists. Wait, you can't do this, he stammered, looking from the detective to me. She's lying. She's crazy. Look at her, she pretended to be deaf. She entrapped me. That has to be illegal. Loretta, who had been cowering in her seat, suddenly surged forward like a cornered badger, finding her voice in the face of her son's ruin. She scrambled up the steps to the stage, her hat askew, her face a mask of righteous indignation. She pointed a shaking finger at me, screaming over the murmurs of the crowd. She set him up. She shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Did you hear him? She faked it. She sat in that chair for weeks and lied to us. She's the criminal here. She's a devil woman, playing mind games with my poor boy. Arrest her. She grabbed the arm of the nearest officer, trying to physically turn him toward me. Get your hands off my son, and arrest that witch. But her performance was cut short not by the police, but by Reverend Thompson, a man who had baptized babies and buried elders in this community for 30 years. He stepped up to the pulpit, his face thunderous. Silence. He boomed, his voice amplified by the sound system, shaking the rafters. Loretta froze, her mouth still open, in a scream that died in her throat. Woman, you have defiled this house of worship with your lies and your greed, the Reverend said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. You stood on this holy ground and used the name of the Lord to steal from the sick. You are a blasphemer and a thief. Get out of my church, and don't ever darken these doors again. The shame hit Loretta like a physical blow. The congregation turned on her a sea of judgmental eyes and disgusted whispers. She shrank back, her bluster evaporating, leaving only a small, pathetic old woman who had gambled her soul for a Birkin bag and lost. The police weren't done. Detective Rivera turned her attention to the front row, walking toward Tiffany, who was trying to make herself invisible in the pew. She stopped in front of her, blocking her exit. Ma'am, stand up, she ordered, her voice flat and professional. Tiffany stood, her legs shaking so hard her knees knocked together. She clutched her purse to her chest as if it could shield her from the cameras that were now flashing from every direction. That necklace is stolen property, the detective said, holding out an evidence bag. Take it off now. Tiffany fumbled with the clasp, her long acrylic nails slipping on the delicate metal. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup, leaving black streaks of mascara on her cheeks. I can't, she whimpered. I can't get it undone. Help me. The officer didn't help her. She just waited, her hand steady, holding the bag, the silence stretched out, agonizing and humiliating, as she struggled with the jewelry. Finally, the clasp gave way, and the heavy emerald slid from her neck, pooling in her hand like green fire. She dropped it into the bag, the sound of the gems hitting the plastic echoing in the quiet room. The earrings followed, then the bracelet. She was stripped bare, right there in front of the people she had tried to impress. Left standing in her cheap dress, with nothing but her shame, David was hauled to his feet by 2 officers. They began to drag him toward the side exit, avoiding the main aisle that was now blocked by angry donors. He fought them, digging his heels into the carpet, his eyes wild and desperate. As they passed me, he lunged forward, the chains of his handcuffs pulling tight. Maya, please, he screamed, his voice raw and broken. Baby, please stop this. I'm your husband. We can fix this. Tell them to stop. I'm your husband. I looked at him one last time, looking at the man who had fed me cold leftovers and plotted to lock me away. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel hate. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a lawyer closing a case. I leaned down, the microphone still in my hand, so my words would be the last thing he heard clearly as a free man. You're not my husband anymore. David, I said, my voice ice cold. You're a defendant, and I am the prosecutor of your life. Get him out of here. 1 week after the church door slammed shut on my marriage, I pulled up to the curb of a rotting bungalow on the south side of the city. This was where Loretta had lived before. She decided my guest bedroom wasn't enough and tried to take my master suite. The paint was peeling in long gray strips like dead skin, and the porch sagged under the weight of years of neglect. My lawyer, Jennifer, sat in the passenger seat, clutching a leather portfolio that held the final nails for Loretta's coffin. I adjusted my sunglasses, checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the humid afternoon heat. The air smelled of stale beer and desperation fitting for the woman who lived here. I walked up the cracked walkway, my heels clicking a rhythm of judgment, Jennifer following a step behind. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open, knowing the lock had been broken for years. Loretta was sitting on a plastic crate in the living room, surrounded by boxes of junk she had hastily packed from my house before the police escorted her out. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, her church hat nowhere to be seen. "Well, look who it is," she spat, her voice hoarse from screaming at detectives. "You come to gloat? You come to see what you did to a poor old woman?" I didn't say a word. I just nodded to Jennifer, who stepped forward and handed her a document. She snatched it, her hands trembling, and squinted at the legal text. "What is this?" she demanded. "It's a notice of eviction," Jennifer said calmly. "And a transfer of ownership?" Loretta laughed, a high, shrill sound that bordered on hysteria. "You can't evict me. This is my house. I've lived here for 30 years. "Not anymore," I said, my voice cutting through her noise. "You stopped paying the mortgage 6 months ago, Loretta. You thought David was going to pay it off with my money, didn't you? Well, the bank was getting ready to foreclose, so I stepped in. I bought the debt. I bought the note through a shell company last week. This house belongs to me now, and I've scheduled the bulldozers for Monday." Loretta dropped the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "You can't," she whispered. "You can't do this. Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged the same way she had shrugged when she talked about sending me to a state facility. "I hear there are shelters downtown," I said. "Or maybe you can move in with Tiffany." "Oh, wait, she's in jail for receiving stolen property, isn't she?" Loretta scrambled up from the crate, lunging at me, but stopped when Jennifer stepped between us. She collapsed back down, sobbing into her hands. "You're the devil," she wailed. "You ruined my son. You ruined everything. He was a good boy until he met you." I laughed, then a cold, dry sound that felt good in my throat. "Your son is a thief and a con artist," I said. "And speaking of David, Jennifer has one more thing for you." Jennifer pulled out a copy of the document David had signed in my bedroom that day, the one he thought was for medical insurance. "Look closely." "Loretta," I said, pointing to the signature at the bottom. "Remember when he was mocking me, pretending to use sign language, forcing the pen into my hand? Well, I swapped the papers while he was busy laughing at his own cruelty. That's not a medical form. It's a confession of judgment and a promissory note, acknowledging that he embezzled $2 million from my accounts and agreeing to repay it in full with interest." Immediately upon demand, Loretta stared at the paper, her eyes bulging. The signature was unmistakable: David Anthony Brooks, scrolled in bold, arrogant ink. "He signed his life away," I said. "He owes me $2 million, Loretta. And since he has no assets and is currently sitting in a cell facing 20 years for fraud, I guess that debt is going to follow him for the rest of his miserable life." I leaned down, getting close enough to smell the fear on her. "You wanted my money so badly. Well, now you have the paperwork to prove exactly how much it cost you." Loretta slid off the crate, landing hard on the dirty floor. She curled into a ball, rocking back and forth, keening like a wounded animal, begging God for mercy, begging me to stop, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, no guilt. Just the cool, clean sensation of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. I turned on my heel and walked out of the house, leaving the door wide open behind me, letting the sunlight pour into the dark rot of her life. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of her wailing was the only closure I needed. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell and the prison doors closed on David's future. 6 months of rebuilding not just my career, but my soul. I sat in my new corner office, the skyline of Seattle stretching out before me, a glittering testament to survival. The walls were painted a soft dove gray, the furniture sleek and modern, a far cry from the oppressive opulence of the house I had sold. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing me in warmth. I felt lighter, stronger. The shadow of the wheelchair and the silence was a distant memory. I wasn't just back, I was better. My firm had tripled its client list. My reputation as a shark was now legendary. People whispered my name with a mixture of fear and respect. The woman who took down her own husband with a microphone and a power drill. The door opened with a soft click and Sarah walked in carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She looked different too. Gone was the mousy, terrified woman who had crept into my bedroom in the dead of night. She stood taller now, her shoulders back, her eyes bright. She wore a tailored suit that fit her perfectly, a symbol of her new life as my paralegal and my partner in crime. She had divorced Andre 3 months ago, leaving him to drown in the wake of his brother's scandal. She had taken her life back, just as I had taken mine. Here, she said, placing a cup on my desk. Double shot oat milk latte, just how you like it. Thanks, Sarah, I said, taking a sip. The rich flavor grounding me in the present moment. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city bustle below us. Do you ever think about them? Sarah asked, her voice quiet but not sad. About David and Loretta? I turned my chair to face her, considering the question. Honestly, sometimes, I admitted, mostly when I see a news story about a con artist or a thief. I think about David sitting in that cell, realizing that his charm doesn't work on concrete walls. I think about Loretta wandering the streets with her shopping cart, realizing that her prayers for wealth were answered with a curse. But do I miss them? No. Do I pity them? Absolutely not. They dug their own graves, Sarah. I just handed them the shovels. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her face. You know, she said, taking a sip of her own coffee, everyone says you're ruthless, that you destroyed them without mercy. But they don't know the half of it. They don't know how hard it was to sit in that chair and listen to them plan your murder. They don't know the strength it took to stay silent. I nodded, remembering the agonizing hours of pretending. The sheer force of will it took to keep my face blank while my heart was screaming. Silence isn't weakness. Sarah, I said, leaning back in my chair. Silence is observation. Silence is strategy. They mistook my quiet for surrender. They didn't realize that while they were making noise, I was making plans. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. My reflection stared back at me clear and sharp. The woman in the glass wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. She was free. They took my hearing for weeks, I said, my voice a low murmur meant only for myself and the ghosts of my past. They tried to take my voice, my dignity, my life. But in the end, I took everything from them. I took their freedom, their reputation, their future. I stripped them down to the bone and left them with nothing but the echo of their own lies. I turned back to Sarah, raising my coffee cup in a toast. To us, I said. To silence, and to the storm that follows it. Sarah clinked her cup against mine. To us, she agreed. And to never letting anyone take our voices again. I took a long, slow drink, savoring the taste of victory. Then I looked back out the window, a small smile playing on my lips. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I disagree. Revenge is a dish best served with a side of justice and a microphone. Don't ever underestimate the patience of a silent woman. Because when she finally decides to speak, her words won't just be heard. There'll be a verdict, and that verdict is final. This story teaches us the brutal truth that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones sleeping right beside us. Maya's journey proves that silence is never synonymous with weakness, but can be a strategic weapon used to gather the strength needed for survival. It reminds us that blind loyalty can be fatal and that we must protect ourselves with evidence and boundaries, even against family. Ultimately, we learn that true power lies in the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike back, and that walking away from toxic relationships is often the only path to finding true freedom and peace. If Maya's calculated victory gave you the satisfaction you were waiting for, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your own story of overcoming betrayal in the comments below.